going to reset so that we can give Anna Pakman the time and space to talk with us about such important work that she does. She's a disabilities rights advocate. She's writer, director, and producer of Wheelchair Money, a short film that she'll tell us all about. I have had the pleasure of knowing her for several years, and I'm delighted to welcome her to the New York Times Read Along.
Hi, Sree. Great to be with you. Hello, everyone.
Thank you, Anna, for being here. Thank you for your patience. We could have let you sleep in 30 minutes longer if we had known that we were going to do this. So I appreciate your stepping up and allowing us to do this. So thank you very much. Can I
Right.
ask you a question right off the bat that, as an ally, I need to ask? What is the current use of appropriate use of the term disability, disabilities, things like that? Someone like me who is naive and ignorant may get those things wrong. So I would appreciate us starting there.
Of course. Well, first of all, it's the intent, right? So I think as long as someone is coming with positive intent, there's a lot of understanding in the community that not everyone may know all the terminology because honestly, it also shifts. So it depends who you ask when. Generally speaking, people with disabilities or a person with a disability which is considered person first language, is preferred by probably people who are, I would say, my age or older, and disabled people, which is more aligned with identity first language, is the preferred language of people my age and younger. So it really depends. I think either one of those is fine. Style guides that I've personally written kind of use both interchangeably.
Thank you. And how do you feel about terms like differently abled and terms like that some people use?
Yeah, I mean, I think those people are probably trying a little too hard. I think it's okay to say disability. It's okay to say disabled. It's the truth. It is what it is.
Okay, thank you. And this is just some of the learning we're going to get here from Anna. We appreciate Anna's time this morning, folks. This is the New York Times Read Along. We do this every Sunday, or at least most Sundays in the summer. And we talk to interesting people as we read the newspaper together. And Anna will have lots to say about the media and how it covers different people with various disabilities. And but I'd like to have her just tell us her story and how she got involved in the fight for rights for the community.
Sure. Yeah. So actually, I've been disabled all of my life, so I have a lot of experience with it personally. And I was born a few years before the ADA was signed. We're coming up on the 34th anniversary on July 26th. And so I am of the generation that grew up with the ADA and have grown up with our rights kind of being codified in federal law and all of these state and local laws that have come as offshoots or in some cases might have been there before the ADA. And so well, we have our rights codified in law. What's the law and what people do in reality are usually two different things. So still to this day, there are places, in my community, I live in the middle of New York City, that are not accessible that probably should be. I think, we'll talk about the film and, spoiler alert, the subway system is still very much a no-go zone for a lot of people who use wheelchairs because very few stations are actually accessible. The MT is working on it, but very few are actually accessible, something like 34%. Um, and also, even for those that are accessible, the elevators aren't very well maintained. So even if you're going to an accessible station, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to get in or out. So, there are huge structural, challenges to fix. And by the way, the MTA is only addressing this because of a lawsuit. And, it's kind of the way the law works is it's on the disabled community to still kind of fight for these rights where it should be a given. Like the disability advocacy groups should have never had to sue the city and the MTA and the state to make sure that we have basic accessibility to public services just as everyone else. So while we've come a long way, there's still, a long way to go. And coming at it, from a place of, relative privilege, I'm someone who has had the benefit of education, work full time. I do consider it also, a bit of a responsibility to speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves, and to make sure that, our voices are out there being heard. And that's kind of what led me to advocacy, to filmmaking as a form of advocacy as well.
Thank you. And this is the film that you made, Wheelchair Money. And you have audio description, which is a way for folks who have hearing issues to be able, or seeing issues to be able to hear and understand the show. So we'll watch the film in a little bit, but you can tell us about the film. But I also have several other questions before we get to that part. But
Sure.
maybe I'll just ask you in terms of uh, the privilege that you talked about. Someone who was watching from the outside would say, how would someone who, like even think of having privilege given your situation?
Yeah, I think privilege is relative to different things. So yes, I definitely have, negative privilege, when, I'm on the street and trying to hail a taxi and they're passing me by and they refuse to take me because they see me in a wheelchair. For sure. But, I think there's, the benefit of different things of having grown up, for starters, having grown up in the US, because I know your show is a global audience. There are many places in the world where people with disabilities, unfortunately, like, are not even able to access like 10% of their local communities. So, having the ADA, having, things be relatively, much more accessible than other places is a privilege. I think also, again, education, being a privilege, having, full-time employment, it, is a privilege as well, because, I'll be honest, like, a lot of some of these problems are solvable with money. And I can tell you, just, from the perspective of like going back to the MTA, the way that I get around is they do have a program called Accessoride. And you can, now they've changed it, they've improved it to the point where if you call in advance, you can get authorized to take a taxi and they will reimburse you. And, again, we're very fortunate now, as opposed to, when we met like 10, 15 years ago, whatever that was, where accessible Ubers didn't exist, accessible taxis were few and far between. And it is a much, easier way to get around the fact that, most of the system is not that accessible. But, if you think about it, someone who is disabled but is on a fixed income can't afford to do that, can't afford to just, put, that expense on their credit card day in and day out, and wait, 1 to 2 months for, the city, the government to reimburse them for what should be accessible to begin with.
Thank you, folks. That's Anna Pakman. We are talking about her work as a disabilities rights activist. And this is the Sunday New York Times Read Along. Earlier today, at the top of the show, we brought on Tom Jolly, the print editor of the New York Times, to talk about how this story came together on the front page, how they made the paper and all of that. And you can watch the recording of the show right after this on all our platforms. We are an international show, as you point out, so we used the word ADA multiple times, the Americans with Disabilities Act. You and I did a show together on the 30th anniversary of the Disabilities Act. I would love for you to describe it in detail so people can understand. And I'm just going to talk about the political moment. Here we are in this country where it's so divided along so many different lines. It might surprise many Americans, especially, to know that the ADA was signed by George H.W. Bush, a Republican president, creating a law that affected businesses all over the country. There were people who were upset about it, including the extra expenses and all of that. The accommodations changed the lives of millions of Americans. And that's typically not something you'll see the Republicans signing up for. So that was that moment in 1990. And if I can go back to 1970, it was also a Republican president and Richard Nixon who signed the EPA and created the Environmental Protection Agency, which the Republicans now want to dismantle. It's in one of the suggestions that President Trump talks about. And finally, when you talk about seat belts, the law that made seatbelts mandatory in the United States was signed by Ronald Reagan, and Elizabeth Dole was his transportation secretary. She was harassed. There were protests, just like we saw with the vaccines and the masking and all of that. So this tells you something about the politics of America changing and the adjustments that people have made. So let's get back to the ADA, why it's important, what it is, and what it has done for millions of people.
Sure. Yeah. So the Americans with Disabilities Act basically says that all public places, as well as all government programs, all places of employment, if there's over, like, I don't recall exactly how many employees it covers, but most, to your point, Sree, most businesses and actually public entities, because like a lot of things are state or local government run, are responsible for making all reasonable adjustments to make sure that people with disabilities are able to access goods, services, events, all kinds of places. And it covers everything from being able to get into a restaurant and eat at a restaurant to not being discriminated against if you're trying to get, a job with, like, let's say the EPA or something like that, or, any, company that you can think of. So, and there are a lot of misconceptions about the law. And, I think the main thing, that the law covers, that's important, like the spirit of the ADA is just that everyone should be able to access everything, and that having a disability shouldn't prevent that. And it's interesting because I think classically, like, disability has been looked at through, various different lenses, the first being the medical model of, like, your problems are the result of, you're not being able to walk or you're not being able to hear, versus, and I think that kind of like focuses on, like, this is something that either we're going to try to heal, and a lot of things like are not healable, but also like it doesn't look at people from the lens of like America being like a very consumerist country, of looking at us as potential customers. And once that shift happens, once people realize like, hey, like, you know what, if I'm not getting in the door, my wallet's not getting in the door, my credit card's not getting in the door, that kind of like helps shift their thinking and understanding of, like, as a business, how this also benefits them. And I think like businesses have come a long way in kind of getting to that place. And it's, like part of like why we see more businesses, same with like LGBTQ Pride Month, getting on board and, kind of celebrating Disability Pride Month with us. But, also, I think the government is a little bit slower in realizing like, hey, if you get rid of these barriers to employment, because a lot of disabled people, actually the majority of disabled people, are not in employment, particularly people with severe disabilities who need assistance with everyday activities, because it actually, like, the government puts so many disincentives in place for people who might want to work, but then can't afford to lose government benefits that pay for their aids or pay for their health care, and therefore just don't go into the workplace. And it's such a missed opportunity, because not only like are we as a society missing out on a lot of talent, but it makes no sense because like here's a base of income that could be taxed and that could self-pay for these services. So it's like kind of like a really weird self-fulfilling prophecy. And I know some governments or entities like are trying to work on that, but it's definitely not coming fast enough.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Here's Kimberly saying thank you for your advocacy, Anna. And we need folks advocating. And Patty's put in the hashtag wheelchair money. So I think what we're going to do is it's a 5-minute film. We're not going to show the whole thing because we want everyone to watch it on their own on YouTube. But Neil's going to show us the first part. Can you set it up for us, Anna? And then Neil will play the first 2 minutes. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. Actually, maybe why don't we do the first minute for friends at SAG. This is a short film that I made this past spring. I made it as part of the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge. The Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge is a global competition that challenges filmmaking teams to make short films that are 5 minutes in length or less. We have 5 days to do it. And that includes everything from setting up the sets, shooting the film, editing the film, all of like that stuff that goes into post-production that takes most people months and months and months. We have to do it in 5 days. And the goal of all of these films being made, and by the way, everyone should go to the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge YouTube or Facebook page and watch all of the films. There's over 100 this year. There are so much amazing talent. And the goal is really to raise awareness, one, of the talent in the disability community, both in front of and behind the camera. My film, about, I want to say 70, 80% of everyone involved has a disability. 100% of the actors that you will see in the film are disabled actors. And also to raise awareness of just important topics. So, as I was alluding to earlier, one of the things that I wanted to really talk about is the accessibility of our public spaces and cities, and how those challenges disproportionately impact people with disabilities, particularly wheelchair users like myself. So Wheelchair Money follows Johnny, who is a young man who uses a wheelchair, mobility scooter, and he actually is looking to get a new wheelchair that better suits his needs, but of course is having trouble getting his insurance company to pay for it because, as people around the world know, American healthcare is pretty garbage. And then he goes on this quest to sell, and you'll see it, something that is very special to him, but kind of funny that that's what it is, given that we see this big handsome man trying to sell this item. So he goes on a quest to sell this thing, goes around across New York City, and encounters a number of challenges with getting around.
So Anna, I just want to ask you a quick question. Sorry, Sree. Before we jump in, I heard you mention we only want to show 1 minute because of SAG rules, I guess. Would you recommend, when I looked at the video, if can we start 30 seconds in, since you gave the setup? Because we'll show some of the challenges that he faces, I think, if we, as opposed to just the setup piece. So with your permission, we will pull that slider up right around here. So this is where his friend, I can't remember her name, but he's getting him to strategize how to get money for his wheelchair. Let's go ahead and
sounds great.
And give me a thumbs up if you hear the audio.
On the talk, if they can get you a
No audio. 1 second.
No, it's audio. Yeah. We're hearing.
chair.
Like, who's going to give a complete stranger a $20,000 power wheelchair? Besides, you only have like 17 followers.
If you don't manifest, you don't get. Or you can finally sell that.
No. Give me that. That's my Princess Diana bear. Like, Felicia gave me this. Like,
Y'all broke up 7 years ago, and she still lives in your head rent-free. Evict her.
why you always gotta be like that?
Says here that bear is worth $500,000.
$500,000? I could do a lot of things with that. I could quit my city job that I hate so much, get a new wheelchair, even take that trip to London. You're right.
I could quit my job too.
What job? You don't have a job. You live here rent free. So you're trying to tell me the only Toys R Us in New York City is all the way in Brooklyn? These elevators never work.
And we'll stop it there. Maybe a little over, Anna, my apologies. But we saw them get to the elevator.
A cliffhanger, yeah.
And that's just the start of the challenge of trying to go from Manhattan to Brooklyn, I think it was, right?
Yeah.
In a wheelchair. I'll encourage folks to watch the show. I put the link in Facebook. It's also on our website. One quick thing in terms of the different versions of the video. You have one I'll call it a standard video, the standard short film, but you also have the audio descriptive version, right? You have two different versions out there. Can you talk about what it took to make the audio the one with the audio description? How do you do that?
Yeah, so all forms of accessibility are incredibly important, and so I was very excited that we were able to do that this year. This was done actually by the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge team, and so the way it works is you have a voice actor essentially read some of the action lines that if someone who has sight is watching a video, like what would be something that a non-seeing audience member would miss if they were watching it. So like those material moments, there was, so anyone, who's interested and wants to watch the audio described version, you'll notice that at the very beginning, there's a setup that describes how the characters look. And I actually, like, my bad, I should have given a visual description just in case anyone needs it at the start of the show. So I'll do it now. So I am a Caucasian appearing woman with curly brown hair almost to my shoulders. I'm wearing a satin pink blouse. There's a virtual background behind me that's of the Brooklyn Bridge, just because I live in a New York City apartment and I don't really want you to see it.
And it's featured in the show, right?
Exactly, it's featured in the film.
Short.
And then we should do that too. And I'm Sree. I am a South Asian Indian American man. I am 53. I have no hair. I am wearing a beautiful shirt with it's black or navy blue with flowers on it, which I love. Neil, over to you. And I'm sitting in a conference room because my apartment is full of guests and friends. So Neil, over to you.
Sure. I am also a South Asian American male, similar age to Sree, 51 years old. The big difference is I do have hair, and I point that out, Anna, even when we don't do these kinds of descriptions. I have glasses. I am wearing a very plain white shirt, which is more my style. And I have headphones, corded headphones, so it looks like I'm a director. That's very intentional. Behind me is my favorite office chair, which my mom does not like. It's a red sports type, gamer chair. And my background are pictures from Maui in 2022. You can see me and my daughter took. There's one of her snorkeling in the top corner. And one of a turtle that she took, and then other landscape. What you may not notice, and if you can't tell, behind me, right on my side here, bottom left, is a picture of Reggie Jackson in full swing that I haven't put up yet, but I still have it in frame.
So let's tell everyone, Reggie Jackson is a former retired baseball player, Hall of Famer for the New York Yankees, Neil's favorite team. And I will say there's a connection to our topic here today. From 1966 to 2018, baseball, Major League Baseball, as Anna may know, used the term disabled list to announce any players who are not available to play. If it's for a day, a week, a month, a year, they would say, these are the guests, these are the players on the DL. That was something we grew up with, and it was ingrained as part of baseball. But disabilities rights activists spoke up and said it made it sound like people who have disabilities can't play baseball. Absolutely. And so in a big change for baseball, they changed the name from the DL to the IL to the injured list. And that's actually more accurate anyway, but it also was the right thing to do. And Anna, I bring this all up just to say that it really matters what folks like you do, because you help make change. Society is very comfortable with the status quo on so many things, and folks like you have made a difference. I will say, the thing I point out about the ADA to people who don't have disabilities, who are unsure about the value of it, I say every curb cutout that you have in New York City is because of the ADA, so that wheelchairs can go, but so can baby strollers, so can bicycles, all kinds of allies and people who are not disabled can benefit from what's happened. Also, as people age into just being older, to have things in the home that are more accessible in stores, all of that is a really good thing. Liz says, thank you for the audio described version. That was really good that we were able to do that. I want to acknowledge some people watching. Macron says the ADA at Water Fountain also addresses racism. Light sensors make better calibration for darker skins. A lot of people don't know that when those automatic water, faucets and things, that if you don't adjust for darker skin, it doesn't work for some of us. And it says that the ADA being a law, even a single complaint is not left to the management's discretion to fix. I think that's a really important point, Anna, in terms of how we think about this. I'll do a couple more greetings and we'll come back to you. Ronald Thomas, great friend of the show, former guest, who was with me in New York. He's usually watching from Dubai. He's here in New Jersey. Call me. We've got to get together before you head back. And Patty says, wheelchair on Broadway made me smile. And Patty also asks about CJ Jones. He's doing groundbreaking work for the deaf community. And Patty also points out that Neil is kind of a golf shirt kind of guy. And Patty also puts in a cheer for the Yankees. So let's get back to you, Anna, and your thoughts on all the things that I was just saying.
Yeah, and first of all, I do have to give a shout out to my friend CJ, who is an amazing advocate, amazing actor, just fantastic human.
One technical note, Anna, I know that you may have issues with your computer. If you mute your computer but unmute your phone, we'll get better audio, and I'll put the audio, add your phone to the screen. There we go. Now, Anna, say something. No, you have to unmute your phone, actually.
Okay.
Whoa, that did not work.
Okay, let's
turn the speaker off on your computer.
Yeah, so I think this is better.
There we go. There we go. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Neil. Yeah, so just want to Sree, just if we could quickly reset, what was the last question?
Yeah, so I was just asking you, CJ Jones and the deaf community. Yeah. There was a question about that, and we also talked a little bit about baseball and the role of advocates in making change. Getting the DL to change to IL is a very big change for folks who care about baseball.
Yeah, unfortunately, I am not one of those people who care about baseball. I did have the pleasure of visiting Cooperstown recently and really loved it. And, if anyone's looking for
Neil's head is exploding in the back. You don't know about this.
No. You don't care about baseball, but you did go to Cooperstown. I care about baseball, but I haven't been to Cooperstown.
Oh my God, you've not been to Cooperstown? They should have a whole wing just for you so that you can visit properly. Oh my God.
Can I ask? While we're talking about it, Anna, can I ask, how was Cooperstown for someone in a wheelchair? How was that experience?
It was actually great. I will say, it's interesting also, the experience of being a New York City person with a disability versus like being a person who probably lives almost anywhere else in America, because America has such a car culture. Yes. And in New York City, we just don't drive because it's actually counterproductive here. And so I was fortunate to go on a road trip with a friend who does, actually a couple of friends. And so from that perspective, we had an accessible van and it was very easy to get around. And I think for the most part, the village has done a really great job of just, from the perspective of like going down the streets, of course, down all the souvenir stores were accessible, but like, about half of them were. From the perspective of someone who doesn't care about baseball, I personally don't know the difference. Maybe if you were there and you were like, oh my God, I can't get to the one place that like had that one ball, so I bet that one guy, it would have made more of a difference. But yeah, I, had a great experience there. And I should also say, like I'm here in my personal capacity, but I do, my full-time job is with I Love New York. So I do have a little bit of a reason to go to various places in the state, even if I don't particularly partake in that pastime. And what I do have to say that Cooperstown has going for is there's just so much to do there. It would surprise most people. And so much of it is not related to baseball. So even if you don't like baseball, it's just a really fun place, a great place to visit.
So I might be able to convince my wife to go there. That's any antiquing or well,
Yeah, a
we can
lot of
talk about that
antiquing.
later.
There's a lot of
I'll send you
antiquing.
an itinerary. How about that?
Call me.
Yeah.
I do want, on a serious note, though, Sree, if you don't mind, I want to get back to something that you raised at the top of the show. We've had a lot of people join later, midstream. Of course, I encourage everyone to go back when the show is over to watch our excellent segment with Tom Jolly talking about breaking news and how the front page evolved, showing us the afternoon edition yesterday before the shooting attempt, the assassination attempt on former President Trump. But I wanted to actually highlight, Anna, the answer you gave to Sree to his very first question, on that question of what is the right terminology to use. People with disabilities, disabled people, differently abled, etc. And I was actually incredibly surprised, shocked, I would say, frankly. It was you shared the generational difference that people your age and older prefer the term people with disabilities because it's people centered, right? If I understand
Mhm.
correctly. And then mostly people younger than you prefer disabled people because it's, yeah, I forget the term you use, but differently centered, right? In terms of the term.
Community first. Yeah. And I would
Right?
say actually I'm right in that middle section. I'm 21. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not. But as I mentioned before, you can do the math. I was born a few years before the ADA. But yeah,
Sure.
it's just a split. And I think, it's kind of gotten to the point where people are okay with it interchangeably.
And the reason I bring that up is that from my work with United Way for a number of years, particularly for around people who are have challenges with housing, the term that we really focused on was people experiencing homelessness, not
Mhm.
someone who is homeless, because that now in that sense that's not necessarily a permanent condition that can change by the day, etc. So if someone's experiencing something, if there's someone who has a disability, maybe that's the difference, that it's not a temporary condition, that this may be an actual long-term issue. But I wanted to just thank you for that clarification because that was something that was very eye-opening for me and hopefully for our audience as well.
Yeah,
Sree,
it's
back to
yeah,
you.
certainly was. Here's Doug Levy with a question. A disabled rights activist told me a few days ago not to have speakers at conferences describe themselves or their clothing because that's not useful. What's a good guideline for video description? And I want to point out the community isn't a monolith, so different people will have different uses and different utility for different things that people see. So just because this person told Doug that it's not useful doesn't mean that other people wouldn't find it useful. So for allies, how do we not just react to the last person we listen to? And that last person may not be someone who is an activist. It may be just their lived experience. And doesn't mean we discount that, but we want to talk to and take guidelines from people who know more, right? So, and in this case, that was an activist who told him not to say it. So how do we respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, you made a great point there, Sree. The community is not a monolith. You're going to get as many opinions as there are people that you ask. I think, though, and again, this is where I don't want to censor myself as like someone who does not have any visual impairment. I think also it's important to keep in mind that disabilities are different. So I take my lead from people who are blind or visually impaired, and that is, kind of where that practice at most disability events actually comes from, is from the blind community. And, in terms of what, individual people might find useful or not, might depend on their level of disability, but they might not be thinking more broadly of others who might be more disabled than they are in that sense.
Thank you. Folks, we have about 30 minutes left with Anna. We still have to go through the paper, Anna, so we've got lots to do. One of the points Patty makes is that there are things that a lot of non-disabled people take for granted. And of course, we should talk for a minute about that other side. What is the right term for people who aren't disabled? We don't want to use words like normal or regular. So what do you folks use, or some folks use, about some people who are not disabled?
Yeah. So I mean, non-disabled, I think, is a fine term. Something that I think is a little bit provocative that I've started using more recently as like we've had some of these debates with like COVID and I think people don't necessarily realize because the government doesn't like they want to have like that victory lap. Oh my God, like Joe Biden recently said we ended the pandemic. Well, no, that's not true. Like the WHO, the World Health Organization, says that we're still in a pandemic and people still are getting very sick. People are still dying from COVID. And the bigger issue, not to make light of death, but I think at this point in the pandemic, the bigger issue is actually that we're in a mass disabling event, that the World Health Organization has said, and they have done research, that about 10% of COVID cases end up resulting in post-COVID conditions, including long COVID, which can be extremely debilitating. And so a term, to kind of get people to be more thoughtful about like, hey, maybe if you're sick, stay home, or like, if you must go out, wear a mask so you don't pass it along to other people, is that everyone is at risk because, the people who are not disabled are not yet disabled. Because, I think you mentioned it earlier too, particularly as people age, everyone is, one unfortunate situation, whether it's COVID, whether it's a car accident, whether it's any number of things, from joining the disability community. We actually are the only minority that anyone can join at any point in their life. So anyone who is against accessibility is actually working against their own best interest, because at a certain point, everyone is going to need accommodations for something in one way or another. And that's why everyone should want these accommodations to exist, and everyone should want everything to be as universally accessible as possible, because you never know when you're going to be the person who needs it.
Thank you. We're going to rush through some comments and then we're going to get to the paper. Makran says sports facilities and the Athletic Disability Act was the basis for major Olympic reforms around the world. Total transformation in mandates for adaptability of architecture, planning, design, infrastructure. Thank you, Makran, for that. Kimberly says, thank you for the educational enlightenment and perspectives. It really helps us connect with empathy. Beautifully said. And Liz Preston says, Doug Levy, I love hearing descriptors of what people are wearing and how they look and their surroundings. Shout out to Netflix and their amazing descriptors. I just watched Survival of the Thickest, filled with fashion, art, and action descriptors. I'm legally blind, and otherwise all I see is blurry colors. So this is the point that I think is important, that the accommodations are worth it if it makes difference for one person, whether it's a wheelchair, whether it's accessibility in some other form, that makes a difference. And a lot of the programs that we do, Digimentors does a lot of professional programs for clients, and those you see the American Sign Language being used. Our clients hire ASL descriptive folks who do the signing, but internationally it's not uniform, right? Even the ASL is not something that everybody uses. So it's very interesting to learn that, and this is all part of all of us learning all the time. And Neil, you might have a thought on that too.
Yeah, it's they have an international sign language that they use, and one thing that's actually really interesting about that, when we do produce those shows, Anna, it's one thing to have when you have ASL interpreters; they can be on the screen, they're hearing what is happening and then signing right for the audience. When we have international sign language, at least the firms that we've worked with, the standard has been to have two interpreters. The international sign language interpreter is actually deaf themselves, so they're a deaf interpreter, and they have a partner who is connecting with them on another video link, a separate Zoom channel or something, who can hear the show, and they're signing to them what is being said, and so then the deaf interpreter can sign in international sign language. I don't know if you've seen that in action or familiar with that.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's fascinating.
So we have and we always have two people signing so that people can trade off. So we have four people when we do an international sign language show, mostly for the UN.
And I presume, Neil, that was also great because it gives employment to these deaf folks who can do this kind of work.
Yeah,
and that's the standard.
It's an absolute standard. I mean, when we work with firms and they ask for this, when we reach out to the company that's providing the interpretation, that's just standard operating procedure. So it was really interesting when I first learned that.
Thank you. Liz says, shout out to the Apple Store on the Upper West Side. They are amazingly inclusive and they treat me like a regular person and read to me when I can't read and describe when I can't see. They're way ahead of the curve. And Liz, I would ask you, how are they on the wheelchair side if you've been to the Upper West Side store or any of the Apple stores?
I actually have not been to the Upper West Side Apple Store, but I have been to some of them in other areas of the city, and I would say yes, they're definitely very accessible. I do want to, I want to acknowledge something that Neil just said, because I think we all have an opportunity to learn here, and I really appreciate Neil for bringing up that international sign language model, because I hadn't heard about that before. So thank you for teaching me something new today. I do want to actually touch on, kind of, you mentioned employment and, the fact that these deaf interpreters, it kind of gives them that opportunity, because a big reason for me in making these short films, because, maybe one day, hopefully, we are working on actually expanding this to, we're going to be working on a pilot or a feature that I'm going to be busy writing later this summer to expand on wheelchair money, because we've had a lot of great feedback, and it got a lot of views when we first released it in the spring. So really want to, we see a big opportunity to kind of expand this universe and these storylines and get more of these storylines out there. But the fact of the matter is that we just all as people, like the information we get is mainly driven by what's in the media, right? So like if you're not on TV, if you're not in the New York Times, you don't exist. And that's, a major motivator for me as a filmmaker and an activist, to address that problem, because growing up, like, I don't remember seeing anyone who looked like me. Okay, like maybe there was like that one girl on Saved by the Bell in one scene, and she was in like the jankiest wheelchair they could find. And that's just not representative of the disability community. So the more that we can get people in employment in the media industry, which of course is like just such a tall order, because there's so much going on in the industry. I think everyone's just trying to find their way, and there's so many challenges between the strikes and the business models kind of being topsy-turvy due to streaming and figuring out how to monetize that. I actually worked on the TV side, and I worked in news for a few years, so kind of like come from those worlds as well when I think about this stuff. But like a big thing is, according to the CDC, people with disabilities are 25% of the U.S. population, and it's kind of similar worldwide, because like people with disabilities exist everywhere. But at least in the U.S. on TV, less than 5% of the characters that we see in scripted television have a disability. So that just is, if you think about disproportionate opportunity for actors with disabilities, talking about like our friends at SAG and everything. And it's even worse actually behind the scenes, because I think we talk a lot about visibility of actors, and I think someone said they love to see wheelchairs on Broadway, and shout out to my friend Ali Stroker, who was the first person in a Broadway musical who uses a wheelchair, and she's a Tony winner. And she's done so many amazing things, since. My friend Ryan Haddad, who was on a Hulu show, and just like, we're starting to see, more of that. Steve Way, Shannon DeVito, folks that, I can start kind of rattling off. But behind the scenes, less than 1% of the writers on these shows have a disability. I imagine like no one's even counting the executives. So the fact that there's not that representation behind the scenes is also what's limiting the representation of what we see, the storylines we see, what gets greenlit to be on camera. So, that's another, aspect of it that we really need to change. And we need more diversity there, more disability inclusion there.
I want to jump in, Sree, with two questions. I know we want to get to the paper, but there are two burning questions I have. One, Anna, with representation in Hollywood and the media. When you have shows where a character has a physical disability, and the actor does not have that disability, is that the equivalent of brown face or blackface? When you have white actors. Short Circuit is the example that comes to mind, playing an Indian character, but they're not. Can you speak to that? I think ER may have been an example of that, but there are others over time.
Yeah, we call it crip face, and it's wrong. All of those examples that you brought up are wrong, and it's equally problematic to have people who are not disabled, even just from the perspective of like that means that like there's an actor with a disability that then can't get work, and there's an argument that's often made by producers of like, oh, but we need people who can sell tickets, or people who can generate streams for names. And like, yes, you do need those people, and you have plenty of like non-disabled characters that you could cast the A-list celebrities at. Like, I don't think it's an unsolvable problem, and it's sort of a chicken or the egg thing too. It's like if you don't give actors with disabilities like the opportunity and like these various roles earlier on, like how are they supposed to become a household brand?
And we have seen several in the last several years come to the fore. The other point I wanted to make is we're talking about physical and visible disabilities. Because of the work that I'm doing, Sree, around mental health, there are also invisible disabilities. People with depression, anxiety, debilitating mental illness that often get overlooked. It's hard to explain that to people if you have that kind of challenge. So I want to throw that out as well.
Thank you. Very, very important. I will just point out one case that I believe is a good example of casting is in the show Breaking Bad, where the son, who's a pivotal character, is in almost the entire series, is played by is a character who has cerebral palsy, and the actor R.J. Mitty has cerebral palsy, and plays him, and they address his disability and its impact on the family and his life in sometimes very very graceful ways. That show, of course, is criticized a lot for how it treats Hispanic characters. So that's a whole other issue, how everyone's a villain and everything else. So even where some shows can do something right in one sphere, can get some things wrong in another sphere and get problems with that. Liz says, Neil, that's so important. Thank you. And Mission Possible, says Patty.